the world watched as Donald Trump and J.D. Vance berated Zelensky. And it was really a sight to behold because I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. Now, obviously, these sorts of acrimonious meetings take place behind closed doors, but our knowledge about those meetings have been limited to the media telling us about them and writing articles saying things like, well, according to anonymous sources who have talked with our newspaper, there was a very heated exchange between some American official and some foreign official, some foreign government official, and blah, blah, blah. And according to anonymous sources, the discussion was very intense and acrimonious, and voices got loud and voices were raised, blah, 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 blah. But for the first time, I think we are now seeing a meeting between a U.S. president and a vice president and a foreign leader, and the discussion is very, very heated and very acrimonious. And you see Donald Trump telling Zelensky that he doesn't have the cards that he needs, and he says, well, I can help give you the cards, I can help get you the cards that you need, etc., etc. And then you see J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance has to get in there because J.D. Vance wants to be the next president of the United States. So he has to show his grit. He has to show his mettle and put his balls on the table. And so J.D. Vance gets into the discussion and he says, Mr. Zelensky, you come here and you don't even say thank you and yada, yada, yada. I mean, he's really imposing that Southern facade of politeness on this Ukrainian guy, on Zelensky. Have you even said thank you? I mean, trying to make him feel guilty and all this stuff. And it was quite a show, I will say. It really did look like reality TV. Perhaps Zelensky didn't know. I mean, I'll just put it this way. I can't prove this, right? But as I was watching the video and I saw the cameras and I saw how Vance was just trying to give off this facade of being this pissed off American leader who's imposing this, I guess you could say, Appalachian morality on Zelensky, I thought, man, is this reality TV? Because Trump was a reality TV star. I mean, the guy did do some WWE type stuff, and he did run a very, very successful and popular reality TV show called The Apprentice, the whole show where he says to people, you're fired. So Donald Trump does have a lot of experience in reality TV. He knows how to market reality TV. He knows how to get the attention of the masses. And so what have the American people been longing for a long time? They have been longing to see the American government tell off other countries and not acquiesce to this whole post-World War II policy of America funding foreign conflicts and getting involved in foreign conflicts and policing the world. So Trump knows this, and he wants to give the people a show. He wants to give off this impression that he is angry with this foreign leader, and he wants to send a message. He wants to put on a show that he is telling off the foreigners and that he is going to stand up for Americans. And this is the impression that Trump wants to give. Truth is stranger than fiction, so we're going to have to see how all this is going to unfold. I don't know the future. I'm not a grand wizard. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a prophet. But Donald Trump is a non-interventionist, it seems, and he does want to end the post-World War II system that we have become so accustomed to. At least to some extent, he wants to end it. And we see the post-World War II world just crumbling. I mean, we see it. We really do see it. And so, for example, the Washington Post put out an article today about how the post-World War II international system that we have been so accustomed to is falling apart, how it's crumbling. There is one line from this article. It was written by this Washington Post author named Ishan Tharoor. He talks about how this guy named Michael Waltz told Zelensky, time is not on your side in terms of the world situation, and most importantly, U.S. aid and the taxpayers' tolerance is not unlimited. So this is the message that the Trump administration is trying to make across. This is the impression that the Trump administration wants to give, that we are here to represent Americans. We are not here to give off, to give away billions of dollars to help a foreign war. We are not going to be giving billions of dollars to help foreigners. We are going to help the American people. Now, whether or not Donald Trump is going to come fully through with this whole idea, time will tell. But the impression is being made, and this is exactly what Americans want to see. They want to see their president telling off a foreign leader. They want to see Doge cutting off foreign aid. Why is this? Because there is this sentiment that is really dominating American society that says, we're tired of helping other people. We want to help Americans. So Trump knows this, and he is capitalizing on it. This argument that says that the patience of the American people, the patience of the American taxpayer is not unlimited, has laid bare the deepening rift between Europe and the Trump administration and Republican Party, jeopardizing U.S. aid for Ukraine, the end of war in Europe, and the prospect of a renewed relationship between Trump and Zelensky. So the part of this statement that I'm really focusing on is how it says that this argument laid bare the deepening rift between Europe and the Trump administration. And remember, Friedrich Merz, who is going to be the next chancellor of Germany, said that he doesn't really like this administration and he doesn't want to depend on this administration, and that Germany really needs to amp up its military spending so that Europeans, specifically Germans, don't have to depend on America for their security. This way of thinking is growing. It is becoming very, very popular in Europe. And remember what Angela Merkel said back in 2017, that the days of Europe relying on the United States and Great Britain are pretty much over. And also remember what Olaf Scholz said some years ago. He said that Germany must become the defender of Europe. So the Germans have aspirations of being the most powerful military in the continent. Germany is about to have a new government, and the two parties that really dominated the most recent German election are the Christian Democrats and the AfD. And the AfD, as I've said many times, is the biggest German nationalist party. They are an ultra-nationalist party in Germany. Their ranks are filled with Nazis. Their most popular leader, Björn Höcke, is a Nazi, and they have a bunch of Nazis who are running this party. And they are hardcore militarist. And there was a German general who recently said something very, very interesting. He says, and he is a top general in the German Bundeswehr, or the German armed forces. His name is Harald Gante. And it says here in this article published by Yahoo News that Germany requires a new form of military service to meet its growing defense needs, a leading general has said. Harald Gante, a top lieutenant general in the German army, told DPA in comments released on Sunday that the country's armed forces, known collectively as the Bundeswehr, cannot rely solely on volunteers to fulfill their list of tasks. And this is what the general had to say, quote, all the additional tasks that we have to deal with today in the area of homeland security and national and alliance defense will not work without significantly more personnel, and that can only be done with conscripts. So the Germans are going to bring back mandatory conscription. They're essentially going to bring back the draft. And the second most popular party in Germany, the AfD, just so happens to be the party that is the most supportive of bringing back mandatory conscription to Germany. They are the biggest supporters of bringing back mandatory military service. And they are the most militaristic party in Germany right now. And this is the party that J.D. Vance supports. This is the party that Elon Musk has been supporting. This is the party that Elon Musk says is the only hope for Germany. So the Americans are supporting the most militaristic party in Germany. And at the same time, they are pushing for the Germans to spend more money on their military. And you see Keir Starmer, who is the head of America's biggest ally, Great Britain, saying the same thing, that Europeans, Germans included, need to be spending more money on their militaries. And so we are seeing the revival of European militarism, German militarism, and we are seeing, it's very interesting to see this, we are seeing the British trying to lead this pan-European force in Ukraine. They want to deploy troops into Ukraine, and they want to be in Ukraine to make sure that Russia doesn't resume the war. But it really is just a revival in militarism. And Britain has quite a history of war with Russia. We can go back to one of the most epic wars in modern history, the Crimean War, in which the British allied with the Ottomans, the Turks, to fight against the Russians. Why? Because the Russians were defeating the Turks, and the Russians were getting very, very close to taking back Constantinople, which is something that the entire Eastern Orthodox world aspires for. They want to retake Constantinople for Eastern Orthodoxy. And the Russians were getting very, very close to fulfilling this dream. And who stopped the Russians? Because the Russians were defeating the Turks. The Turks have never been able to defeat the Russians. Never. The Turks have had numerous wars with the Russians, and the Russians have devastated the Turks in all of those conflicts. And so who came to the rescue for the Turks? It was the British in the Crimean War. And the British, alongside the Turks, defeated the Russians. That was the Crimean War. And so today, what do we see? We see the British wanting to revive their militarism to fight the Russians. And who are the British allied to? They are allied with the Turks. And the Turks are in Syria right now. And who else is in Syria? The Russians. And so eventually there's going to be a clash between the Turks and the Russians. They're going to fight over Syria. They're going to fight over the Black Sea. They're going to fight over the Mediterranean. And the British right now want to revive their militarism to go against the Russians. So it's almost like we are seeing history rhyming. It's almost like we are seeing a rhyming between what's happening now and what happened in the past. And it looks like we are going to see history rhyme, a rhyme between the Crimean War and what could happen in the future. And we are seeing the Germans also rising up with their own militarism. And we are seeing the rise of the most militarist party in Germany, the AfD. And this is the party that the Americans are pushing. Why? Ask yourself why. Ask yourself, why are the Americans pushing for the success of the most militaristic party in Germany? Because the Americans want to see German militarism being revived. Why? Because the Americans were backing Ukraine against Russia, and that was NATO through its Ukrainian proxy going to war with Russia, and NATO lost. And NATO right now is at the disadvantageous position. They are not in an advantageous position. They are in the losing position. So the Americans have concluded that what they need to do is get the biggest dog in Europe against the Russians. Get the biggest enemy of the Russians in Europe against the Russians. And the Germans, they fought two major wars against the Russians, World War I and World War II. We've all heard of these conflicts. And yes, the Germans lost in both of those wars, but in both of those wars, the Russians had immense casualties, oceans of casualties. Millions upon millions of Russians died fighting the Germans in those world wars. So really, in Europe, who is the biggest threat to the Russians? It's a militaristic, nationalistic Germany, and we can see this just by looking at the history. And so I think the Americans just got together, these American Pentagon elites got together, and they said, let's get the biggest dog in Europe and just have them have all these European auxiliaries encourage them to have a pan-European military force. And yes, let the British also get involved, because the British are America's biggest ally, and have them just go against the Russians. Let's just sick this big this big European dog against the Russians. And the British have a history of warring with the Russians, the Crimean War, and the Germans definitely have a history of going to war with the Russians and fighting in absolutely bloody and horrendously violent wars in which countless lives were lost, World War I and World War II. And so just get the big European dog against the Russians. And that's what the Americans are doing. And we can see this in America's history, in the Cold War. This is a very, very recent event, the Cold War, which ended in the early 1990s. So the Cold War, very recent. And what did the Americans want to do in the Cold War? They wanted to revive all of the nationalistic ideologies of Europe. They wanted to revive right-wing nationalism in Europe so that the Americans could use these European nationalists against the Soviets. They tried to revive nationalism in Germany. They tried to revive nationalism in Spain, in Italy, even in Belgium, because they wanted to use the nationalists against the Soviets. And it looks like the Americans are doing the same damn thing. It looks like the Americans are just following the old Cold War playbook of pushing for far-right nationalism, because they know that with the far-right nationalists, you have really two things. It's a twofold package with the nationalists. With the nationalists, you have militarism, and militarism is necessary if you want to have Europeans fighting against the Russians. And the nationalists also bring a metaphysical component to this. The nationalists bring spirit, because it's very difficult to incentivize young men to fight in a war unless you give them a cause to fight for. And that cause would be fighting for nation, fighting for your race, fighting for your family. And what nationalists love to do is they love to say things like, well, your race is just one big family. The German people are one big family. So just as you would fight to defend your immediate family members, we must also get together as one collective family to fight against our enemies. And so with far-right nationalism, you have militarism and you have the metaphysical component that is necessary to incentivize young men to join the military. And so this is what we're seeing. We are seeing this trend, and we are seeing a rhyming of history. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. And I just want to add, with the involvement of the British, it looks like we could be seeing in the future, and as I've said, history is going to rhyme, so it looks like we could be seeing a mix between what happened in the Crimean War, in which the British fought the Russians to defend the Turks, and what happened in World War I and World War II, in which we saw the Germans fighting the Russians in a very extremely existential war. So that's what I mean when I say we are going to be seeing the rhyming of history. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.